My parents forgot my birthday for their golden child's tantrums. After 15 years of neglect, I moved out, cut contact, and built a new life. I was the older brother, just by a year, but in our house, it felt like I was from a different planet compared to my sister. My sister, Emily, was born with chronic health problems and a physical disability. Her life was a series of doctor's visits, special accommodations, and a lot of pain. Mom and Dad did everything to make her life smoother and happier, which I get, but it meant they didn't really show up for me the same way from as early as I can remember. My role was the healthy one, the easy kid, which meant I was expected to fend for myself a lot. My parents were always making special time for Emily, planning things that could accommodate her limitations. That stuff takes a lot of time and energy, I know, but it left little room for anything else, including me. When Emily and I were little, I remember being excited about family outings, thinking maybe this time we'd all go together. But more often than not, I ended up staying with a neighbor or dropped off at Aunt Linda's place. It was always, "We'll bring you next time," or "It's just easier if Emily doesn't have to travel too far today." Those next times for me seemed to never come. It wasn't just the trips, it was the everyday things too, playing in the park, going for ice cream, or just watching a movie together. They always chose something that fit Emily's needs, which I understand. She needed more care. But it often felt like they forgot they had another kid who also wanted to feel like part of the family. I think the first time I really felt the sting of being the forgotten one was during one of my birthdays. It must have been my 8th or 9th birthday. There was no party, no special dinner. I woke up that day thinking maybe they had a surprise planned, but the whole day went by and nothing happened. They had taken Emily to a concert she had been looking forward to. Something they had planned for months, and it just so happened to fall on my birthday. They came back talking about how much fun it was, how it was such a good show, and I just sat there feeling pretty invisible. The next day, my mom realized they'd missed my birthday, and tried to make up for it by handing me a $5 gift card they had picked up last minute. It was a kind gesture, sure, but it felt so afterthought, so insignificant compared to the effort they put into making sure Emily could see her favorite band live. As we got older, this pattern didn't really change. It was always about what Emily needed, and I was expected to understand, to not make a fuss. I spent a lot of time alone or at friends' houses, anywhere I felt a bit more seen. I remember for one year I was turning 10, double digits, a big deal for any kid. I had been dropping hints about wanting to do something fun as a family, maybe hit the local arcade or have a pizza party at home. But as the day drew closer, I could tell that nothing was planned, no whispers of secret plans, no hidden gifts around the house. Nothing. On the morning of my birthday, it was like everyone had forgotten. There was no happy birthday at breakfast, it was just cereal as usual, and conversations about what Emily needed for the day. She had been having a rough week health-wise, so I understood the focus was on her, but it stung. It really did. I went to school that day hoping my parents would remember and maybe surprise me when I got back home. But when I walked back in through the door that afternoon, it was clear that wasn't happening. There was no surprise, no cake waiting on the counter. My mom was on the phone sorting out some new therapy sessions for Emily, and my dad was at work as usual. It felt like any other day. Except it was supposed to be my day. I didn't say anything. What was the point? It wouldn't make them remember or care. I just went to my room and tried to make the best of it. My friends at school had said happy birthday, and they even pulled together some change to buy me an ice cream at lunch, so that was nice. It helped a little, made the day feel a bit less ordinary. The next day my mom must have seen the date on something because she suddenly realized they'd missed my birthday. She apologized and said things had just been so hectic with Emily. I nodded, said it was okay, but it wasn't really. They promised we'd do something that week to make up for it. Come the weekend though, plans fell through again. Emily wasn't feeling up for going out, and instead of maybe doing something at home, we ended up just watching some of her favorite movies. My dad picked up a cake, one of those pre-made ones from the grocery store, but it was almost an afterthought, a consolation prize, not a celebration. This pattern wasn't new, it was just more of the same, another year, another forgotten celebration. It wasn't just about the party or gifts. It was about feeling recognized, feeling like I mattered too. But each missed birthday was a reminder that in the grand scheme of things, my needs, my desires, were always on the back burner. By the time my 12th birthday rolled around, I had lowered my expectations. I didn't bother hinting or asking for anything. It was easier not to hope for something that wasn't going to happen. That year, I spent my birthday like it was just any other day. I did my homework, played video games, and helped around the house. My parents did remember to say happy birthday this time at least. There was a quick hug, a brief acknowledgement, and then back to the usual routine. Emily had a doctor's appointment that day, so most of the attention was on getting her ready and out the door. I think that was the birthday that hurt the most, Not because it was dramatically bad or anything crazy happened, but because it was so painfully normal. There was no neglect out of malice, it was just neglect out of habit. They were so used to pouring all their energy into Emily's needs that mine just didn't register on their radar. It wasn't just birthdays either. School achievements, hobbies, things I was proud of, they all just sort of got nodded at and then brushed aside. As I got older, the disappointment started to harden into something else, resignation. I stopped expecting things to be different. Friends' birthday parties were a glimpse into what it could be like with parents who planned and celebrated their kids. I enjoyed those moments, basked in the warmth of those celebrations, and then went home to my reality. In therapy, when we started going a few years later, one of the therapists pointed out that these missed moments were significant. They weren't just little slips, they were patterns that showed where the priorities lay. Discussing it in those sessions, I tried to express how these patterns made me feel unimportant, secondary. My parents listened, but there was always an excuse, always a reason why things had to be the way they were. They promised to try harder, to be more aware, but the habits of a lifetime are hard to break. Looking back now, I can see how these early experiences shaped my expectations about life and relationships. They taught me to not ask for too much, to not expect too much. That way, you can't be disappointed. But they also taught me about the kind of parent I want to be someday, someone who remembers, who celebrates each child for who they are, not just what they need. My grandparents were the unsung heroes of my childhood. With my parents usually wrapped up in the endless cycle of managing Emily's health issues, it was Grandma and Grandpa who stepped in to fill the void. They didn't do anything extraordinary, but in my world, they were a beacon of normalcy and warmth, a contrast to the cold at home. Grandma had a way of making every little thing seem special. She had this old, faded recipe book, and every time I visited, she'd let me pick a recipe to try out together. It didn't matter if it was her famous chocolate chip cookies or something as simple as spaghetti, it was our thing. It was during these cooking sessions that she'd share stories about her own childhood, about the mischief she got into with her siblings. I lived for those stories. They were a window into a world where I felt connected, where I wasn't just the other child. Grandpa, on the other hand, was the quiet strength of the pair. He was a man of few words, but he had a presence that made you feel secure. He loved model trains, and the basement of their house was dedicated to his elaborate setups. He'd spend hours down there tweaking and fixing, and I was always welcome to join. It wasn't just about the trains, it was about sharing something he loved with me, something that wasn't overshadowed by the constant concerns that hung over my family. Their house was my refuge. The days I spent there were the days I felt most like a kid, not just a bystander in my sister's life. They celebrated every report card, every small achievement that my parents often overlooked. When I scored my first goal in soccer, Grandma made a cake, and Grandpa put up a little display in the living room with the ball I'd used in the game. They made it seem like the biggest deal, and that meant everything to me. But life has a way of reminding you that nothing stays the same. 3 years ago, Grandma got sick. It wasn't sudden, it was a slow decline that seemed to parallel the gradual fading of my childhood innocence. Her vibrant energy dimmed, and the kitchen, once the heart of our interactions, grew silent. I watched helplessly as the disease took hold, turning our cooking sessions into brief strained visits where she'd mostly sleep while I sat by her side, holding her hand, missing her even though she was right there. When she passed away, it was like losing a part of my foundation. The funeral was a blur, a procession of people offering their condolences, saying how wonderful she had been, how she'd be missed. I nodded, thanked them, but inside, I felt a hollowing out, like someone had scooped out the center of me. Grandpa changed after Grandma's death. The spark that had been in his eyes when he showed me a new train setup or told a joke, it faded. The basement gatherings became less frequent, and then they stopped altogether. He moved through the days mechanically, a routine without joy. The model trains gathered dust, and our conversations grew stilted, both of us lost in our grief. It wasn't long before the decision was made to move him to a nursing home in another city. The house, too big and too full of memories, was too much for him alone. I understood the reasons, but it felt like another anchor being lifted, leaving me adrift. Our visits became monthly trips that were more about ensuring he was okay, rather than sharing in anything meaningful. I'd sit in the sterile visitor room making small talk, both of us avoiding the gaping absence that Grandma left behind. With Grandma gone and Grandpa far away, my buffer against the loneliness at home was gone. The transition back to life where my sister's needs dominated was harder than ever. The contrast was stark, where my grandparents had made me feel seen. At home, I was more invisible than before. The routines continued. Emily's needs continued to shape our family life, and I continued to fade into the background. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. During family gatherings, conversations would circle around Emily's latest treatments or her challenges. I'd chip in where I could, try to share bits about school or friends, but it often felt like speaking into a void. My words seemed to dissipate the moment they left my lips, unimportant and fleeting. Even at school I started to withdraw. Friends invited me to hang out, but I found myself declining more often, opting instead to spend time alone. It was easier than explaining why I was down, or why I didn't feel up to pretending everything was okay. They knew about Emily, of course, but no one really understood the full weight of living in her shadow, of having my own needs and desires perpetually sidelined. The worst part was feeling guilty for these feelings. Emily didn't choose her health issues, and I knew my parents were doing their best under tough circumstances, but knowing that didn't ease the sting of neglect, nor did it fill the growing gap within me, a space where familial warmth once lived. As I navigated this new reality, I realized that I needed to find new sources of support, new ways to feel valued. I turned to teachers, to coaches, any adult who might offer a word of encouragement or a moment of recognition. Each small acknowledgement felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I could be more than just the healthy sibling, more than just the other child. Looking back, losing my grandparents not only marked the end of their physical presence in my life, but also the end of my childhood in many ways. It forced me to face the imbalance in my family head-on, and to start seeking ways to carve out my own space, my own identity, independent of the family drama that had so long defined me. Sibling rivalry is typical in most families, but when your sibling has special needs, the dynamics can shift drastically. The term rivalry doesn't even feel right. It's not like we were ever competing on the same level. Emily's needs always came first, which I understood on a rational level, but emotionally, it was a whole different story. It all came to a head one evening that felt like any other at first. I was in the middle of a gaming session, a rare moment of relaxation in a house that often felt more like a revolving door of therapists and medical crises. Emily was having a tough day, more pain than usual, which made her short-tempered and moody. Mom and Dad were doing their best to comfort her, but nothing was really working. That's when things took a turn for the worse. In her frustration, Emily lashed out. It wasn't the first time she had a tantrum, but this time my gaming console bore the brunt of her anger. Controllers flew, the console crashed to the floor, and the game I was in the middle of vanished into a screen of static. I was stunned, just staring at the wreckage of what was my only real escape from the everyday stress. When I looked to my parents for support, hoping for once they'd see the impact of Emily's actions on me, all I got was a hurried apology as they scooped her up to calm her down. They were more concerned with her tears, her reasons for the outburst, than the fact that she destroyed my property. Something that mattered to me. The message was clear: her immediate needs were more important than any of my feelings or possessions. That night, after Emily calmed down and everyone else seemed to move on, I was left with a broken console and a growing resentment that no amount of silent brooding could dissipate. I lay in bed thinking about how unfair it was that her needs not only came first, but seemed to be the only needs that mattered. It wasn't her fault she was in pain or that she had limitations, but why did that mean I had to be the collateral damage? Over the next few days, I tried to brush off the incident, but the frustration simmered. The absence of the console was a constant reminder. I found myself snapping over small things, withdrawing further into myself. My parents noticed but misinterpreted my mood as typical teenage angst, attributing it to school stress or just a phase. They suggested maybe I needed more sleep, or should try talking to someone like a counselor at school. It felt like another dismissal, another way of saying that my problems weren't as significant. It was around this time that I first brought up the idea of family therapy. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was desperate for anything that might help us communicate better. To my surprise, my parents agreed. Maybe they realized things were starting to spiral, or maybe they hoped a professional could smooth over the growing cracks in our family dynamics. Either way, we found ourselves sitting in a stark, quiet room across from a therapist who seemed genuinely interested in hearing from each of us. Therapy sessions started to become part of our weekly routine. While they were supposed to be a space for all of us to improve our communication and understanding, it quickly felt like we were just going through the motions. My parents, eager to rectify their past neglect, initially threw themselves into the process with a kind of desperate energy. For a brief period, it seemed like we were making genuine progress. During these sessions, the therapist encouraged us to share our feelings openly, which was a new and uncomfortable experience for everyone. I talked about feeling like an outsider in my own family, about the pain of having my needs and interests consistently overlooked. It was liberating to voice these feelings, to have them acknowledged by a professional who didn't immediately dismiss them as teenage drama. My parents listened, really listened, for the first time in a long time. They seemed shocked to hear how deeply their actions, or lack thereof, had affected me. There were tears, apologies, and promises to do better. For a moment I allowed myself to believe that change was possible, that we could find a new normal where I wasn't just an afterthought. To put these good intentions into practice, we started implementing more structured family time. It was decided that once a week, we would do something as a family that didn't revolve around Emily's medical needs or preferences. It was a small concession, but it meant the world to me. The first few times were awkward but also kind of nice. We went to movies, visited museums, and even spent an afternoon bowling, activities that had no direct connection to hospitals, therapy, or medical discussions. However, the shift in focus didn't go unnoticed by Emily. She had grown accustomed to being the center of our parents' universe, and the sudden change sparked a deep-seated jealousy. It started with small comments here and there, subtle digs about how much fun we must have had without her, or how it was nice for her to have some quiet time at home. Her tone was light, but the underlying message was clear. She felt left out, and she wasn't happy about it. The situation escalated quickly. During what was supposed to be a calm family dinner, Emily broke down. She accused our parents of neglecting her, of forgetting about her needs in favor of spending time with me. Her reaction was intense, fueled by a mix of genuine fear of being left out and a manipulation tactic she had learned to use effectively. My parents, caught off guard and riddled with guilt, stumbled over themselves to reassure her, to apologize for making her feel that way. The backlash was immediate. Our scheduled outings became fewer and farther between, and when they did happen, they were overshadowed by the tension of Emily's displeasure. My parents were torn, trying to balance their newfound commitment to me with their instinctive need to cater to Emily's emotional and physical health. It was a balancing act they couldn't manage, and slowly but surely, things started to revert to how they had always been. Feeling guilty and responsible for the turmoil, I suggested maybe we should just go back to how things were before. Maybe it was easier if I just sucked it up and let things be centered on Emily. But the therapist, to their credit, pushed back. They pointed out that this reaction was exactly why we were in therapy, to break these unhealthy patterns, not to reinforce them. So, we continued with the sessions, each one becoming more charged than the last. Emily's feelings of jealousy and abandonment became a central theme, and much of our time was spent addressing her fears and insecurities. It felt like we were moving backwards, focusing on her even in a space that was supposed to be about fixing the broader family dynamics. In a particularly heated session, Emily made a startling accusation. She claimed that our parents were favoring me over her, that they loved me more because I was the normal one. The accusation stung, and it threw our parents into a tailspin of self-doubt and confusion. They reassured her, sometimes at the expense of their own emotional well-being and certainly at the expense of the progress we had made. It was a painful cycle to watch, and even harder to be a part of. I began to feel like the villain in my own family story, simply for wanting a bit of the attention and love that came so freely to Emily. I found myself withdrawing again, pulling back from the therapy sessions and from my efforts to be more present in the family. What was the point if it only caused more pain? The breaking point came when my parents, in an effort to manage Emily's increasing distress, suggested we all attend a different therapist, one that could perhaps offer a new perspective on our family's issues. They thought maybe a fresh start could smooth things over, but I saw it for what it was, an attempt to placate Emily and perhaps find someone who would tell them they were doing the right thing by focusing so much on her. I felt defeated, all the talks, all the sessions, all the promises of change. It seemed like they were just empty words, easily blown away by the first sign of difficulty. I was tired of fighting, tired of feeling like my presence was a burden or a cause of conflict. So, I pulled away, resigned to the status quo where Emily's world was the only one that mattered, and I was just living in it. The cycle of therapy sessions and rehashed promises became too much. I was tired, emotionally and mentally drained from the constant tug-of-war for my parents' attention. It seemed like no matter what we discussed in those sessions, the outcome was always the same. Emily's needs overshadowed everything else, and my feelings were just side notes that were acknowledged but never really addressed. The breaking point came during a particularly tense therapy session. We were all seated awkwardly, the air thick with unspoken frustrations. The therapist had been trying to guide us toward a more balanced family dynamic, but the efforts felt futile. My parents were obviously stressed, torn between their two children, and Emily was visibly upset, feeling like she was losing her grip on the only reality she knew, one where she was the primary focus. I had prepared myself to speak openly that day, to really lay out how I felt. I needed them to understand the depth of my isolation within the family. So, I took a deep breath and started talking. I didn't just skim the surface with general statements about feeling left out, I dove deep. I shared how hurt I was that my achievements and milestones felt ignored, how it felt like my birthdays were just days on the calendar to them, how I felt more like a roommate than a son. The room was quiet as I spoke, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's holding back a storm. My parents looked shocked, perhaps not realizing how much their actions, or lack thereof, had affected me. Emily, however, seemed agitated, shifting uncomfortably in her chair as I laid out my feelings. When it was their turn to respond, the reaction was not what I had hoped for. My parents were defensive. They started with apologies, as they had before, but quickly shifted to justifying their actions. They talked about the complexity of Emily's health issues, how her needs weren't just preferences but necessities. They said they were doing their best under difficult circumstances. Emily then spoke, her voice shaky with emotion. She accused me of trying to make her feel guilty for things beyond her control, of being selfish for wanting what she saw as equal attention. The words stung. It wasn't about competing with her. It was about feeling like part of the family. The therapist intervened, trying to steer the conversation back to a constructive path. But the damage was done. The air was thick with hurt feelings and accusations. I felt a mix of anger and despair. It was clear that no amount of talking was going to change the fundamental dynamics in our family. My parents were too entrenched in their roles as caregivers for Emily to see beyond her immediate needs, and Emily herself was not ready to see our family as anything but centered around her. The session ended with a tense agreement to keep trying, but as we left, I knew something had shifted for me. The faint hope I had held on to that therapy could bring us to a better understanding had evaporated. I was done. Done trying to fight for attention, done trying to explain my feelings to people who couldn't seem to grasp their importance. Over the next few weeks, I withdrew. I spent more time alone, focusing on school and my own interests outside of home. My parents noticed but seemed unsure how to bridge the gap that had widened between us. They made tentative attempts to connect, asking about my day or my plans for the weekend, but it felt hollow, like too little too late. Emily also noticed my withdrawal, but her response was mixed. Part of her seemed relieved to have the spotlight firmly back on her, but there was also a tentative curiosity about my newfound independence. She asked me a few times about my activities, a flicker of interest in her eyes, but we were both too scarred from past conflicts to really open up again. As the weeks turned into months, my plans for the future began to take shape with more clarity. I realized that I needed to find my own path, one that didn't involve waiting for my family to recognize my needs. I started researching colleges, scholarships, and programs that interested me, pouring my energy into building a life where I didn't feel like a secondary character. My relationship with my parents remained strained. We spoke, we shared meals, we lived under the same roof. But there was an unspoken understanding that things were different now. They continued their focus on Emily, now more cautious in their interactions with me, perhaps afraid of sparking another confrontation. The suggestion to switch therapists came up again, this time with a more urgent tone from my parents. They were hopeful that a new perspective could mend the fractures within our family. But for me, it felt like agreeing to start a book you already knew the ending of, pointless and exhausting. I declined. I told them it was too late for new beginnings in therapy, that ship had sailed and I was already looking toward new horizons. They were disappointed, but there was also a resignation in their acceptance, a recognition that they had missed too many opportunities to make things right. I wasn't angry anymore, just resolved to move forward, to build my own world where I was more than just an afterthought. It wasn't the family dynamic I had hoped for, but it was one I could live with, knowing I had tried, knowing I had finally chosen to prioritize my own well-being. After I moved out and reduced contact with my family, life started feeling more like mine. I wasn't just the older brother always sidelined by my sister Emily's needs anymore. I was just me, living my own life, making my own rules in a new city. The decision to go low contact wasn't easy. Family is family after all. But the constant neglect had taken its toll, and I needed space to figure out who I was outside of that dynamic. At first, the quiet was strange. No background noise of Emily's needs or the chaos that usually surrounded them. It was just me and my thoughts, which was scary and freeing at the same time. I found a small apartment, got a job that I didn't mind, and started piecing together a routine that was all my own. When my first birthday rolled around after the move, I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a call if I was lucky. But the day came and went with silence, no calls, no texts, nothing. It hit harder than I expected. It's not like I wanted much, just a sign that they remembered I existed outside of Emily's world. I ended up spending the day alone, reflecting on everything that had led to this point. It was a sobering reminder of why I had put distance between us. I let it slide without making a fuss. Instead, I used it as motivation to invest more into my new life. I started making friends, really good ones, people who showed up for me, who remembered small details and made plans. We'd hang out after work, grab drinks, or just chill at someone's place playing games or watching movies. Little by little, I began to feel part of something again, a community where I wasn't just the other kid. The next year, I approached my birthday with a new mindset, I didn't bother checking my phone for missed calls or messages from home. Instead, I planned a big night out with my friends. We hit a couple of bars, laughed more than I had in years, and celebrated until the early hours. It was hands down the best birthday I'd ever had. For the first time, I wasn't an afterthought but the main event, and it felt amazing. Days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I called home. Sure enough, they had forgotten again. This time, there wasn't even an apology, just straight into how things were going with Emily. It stung a bit, but it also solidified my resolve that I was doing the right thing by keeping my distance. My life was here now, with people who valued me. By the third year in my new city, my birthday had become something I genuinely looked forward to. I threw another big party, this time even bigger. We rented out a space, had a DJ, the works. It was a blast. Friends, both old and new, showed up to celebrate. It was during this party, surrounded by people who cared about me, that I fully realized the weight of what I had been missing out on all those years. Once again, I made that after-the-fact call to my family. As expected, they had forgotten my birthday once more, but this time, I didn't even bother bringing it up. We chatted briefly about mundane things, and that was it. That call was short and perfunctory, a stark contrast to the warmth and joy of my celebrations. It confirmed that while they were my family by blood, my real family was made up of the friends who stood by me. The difference in these relationships was stark. With my friends, I was never an add-on, I was integral. They didn't just remember my birthday, they made it special. They didn't just listen to how my day went, they were a part of my day. We supported each other through job changes, breakups, successes, and failures. We built a network of mutual care and respect, something I had always longed for but never quite experienced with my own family.